I'm an ER nurse. I had an old lady come in by ambulance near death. She was a DNR, so we weren't going to do much for her. She didn't have any family that we could find. The hospital was full, so we had to keep her in the ER for the night. Again, she was near death. When you've seen enough people die, there's no mistaking it, and she was almost there. Barely responsive, pale, cool breaths were really irregular. Heart rate was up and down too. We just turned the lights down and kept an eye on her monitor, basically waiting for her to die. About an hour later, she's standing at the door of her room. She'd gotten up and put on all her clothes. We were all like, WTF? One of the nurses went to check on her, and she said she was hungry. Not knowing really what to make of things, we got her a chair, a bedside table, and went to the cafeteria and got her a tray of food. Lady sat there, ate all her food, talked with the staff a little. After about an hour, she told her nurse that she was tired and wanted to lie back down. We helped her back into bed, and within 30 minutes, she was dead. Not exactly paranormal, but in 22 years in busy-ass inner-city ERs, it's the weirdest thing I've seen. I used to work in a skilled nursing facility. I was usually assigned to the Alzheimer's ward. One night, I'm in the linen room stocking my cart, and I heard someone shuffle up behind me. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and there was no one else in the room. The door was still shut too. Another lady started to complain that a man was coming into her room at night. Again, Alzheimer's, so I didn't think much of it. So to reassure her, I told her I'd check on her throughout the night. She complained of this man every night for 2 more weeks when I asked her to describe him to me. He's real handsome and wears a black suit. Oh, he's right behind you now, honey. That freaked me the hell out. Of course, there was no one behind me. She died the next night in her sleep. I was a new nurse at our hospital and only been working there a couple of months. I had brought a patient of mine up to day surgery from the ER for an endoscopy, and they called back down and asked me to bring her family up because she only spoke Italian and not enough English, and they needed someone to consent for the procedure. After dropping them off, I walked past the waiting room to head back down the hall to the elevators. I took the back way to get to the ER, and the hallways are all deserted. It used to be the pediatric wing of the hospital, but that is all shut down for years, and the rooms are just empty and full of broken equipment and beds and crap. As I reached the old nurses' station at the T-junction between the pediatric hallway and the hallway that goes to the elevators, I saw a little girl standing across from the nurses' station further down the hall. She had big pigtails, was wearing a brown dress, white shoes, holding a teddy bear. I thought perhaps she was a family member who had walked away from the day surgery waiting room. I was concerned that she would go into one of the rooms and get hurt or lost, so I said, "Hey, little girl, what are you doing? You don't need to be over there. You're going to get hurt." And I walked around the nursing station to go grab her hand and bring her back. I kid you not, she vanished as I got about 15 feet away from her. Every hair on my body stood up straight, and I turned and ran like a bat out of hell down to the elevator. I pounded that button for what seemed like an eternity until the elevator got to the floor. As I got back to the ER, I walked up to the nurse's desk, white as a sheet, and one of the older nurses looked at me and said, "Jesus Christ, what's wrong with you?" I remember babbling like an idiot as I tried to tell them what happened. After listening to me for a moment or two, the nurse said, "Oh, you saw the little girl ghost. She's been around here for years." And I remember saying, "Well, thanks for telling me about it before this." Apparently the ghost has even been seen down in the ER, ducking in and out of patient rooms and peeking around curtains. My wife worked up on the 7th floor, and she said that one time on nights, a whole row of patient rooms started yelling about a little girl that was running around in the rooms. I guess she gets around. I work in intensive care, a small community hospital. We have a 9-bed unit that is completely closed off from the medical floor via 2 doorways. 2 nights ago, we were all sitting at the station, charting, when we all heard footsteps coming down the hall. It's a completely open unit where you can see every room from everywhere. No one was in the unit with us. CT is below us, and they close at 5, unless an emergency comes in. And we only have people on the second floor. The third is used as storage, so no one was above us. It happened 2 or 3 times. Then last night, cupboard doors kept opening and shutting in the 2 empty rooms. I finally asked my coworker what was going on, and she just told me that it usually happens after someone passes, especially if it was sudden. We had 2 codes last week that we lost, and I guess everyone has had weird stuff happening for a couple of days. I used to work in a state institute for the developmentally disabled. We were temporarily relocated to another building for remodeling of our building. Anyways, I was working one night, second shift. We had a locked Pika unit. I saw one of the residents walking down the hall. Very distinct gait and very distinct yellow t-shirt with a happy face on it. I went into the ward to let staff know that they had an escapee. This was a serious situation because this particular resident, Larry, would ingest absolutely anything, literally anything. He was also very reluctant to go back to his home ward, hence why I didn't bring him back myself. He needed 2 escorts. When we got back into the hall, less than 15 seconds later, Larry was gone. We searched the entire building, outside, downstairs, all wards. He was nowhere to be found. This whole search lasted less than 10 mins because I had all extra staff looking for him. I was just about to call the house supervisor to let her know that we lost someone when out from the bathroom walks Larry with one of the staff. He had been getting his bath in the bathroom for the last 30 mins or so. Kind of freaky. I absolutely, without a doubt, saw Larry in the hallway. I never would have short-staffed the wards like I did if I hadn't seen him. Like I said, very distinctive gait, look, clothing. I took a lot of razzing that night. They all thought that I was crazy. Anyways, come to find out the next day, after the story goes around, that I am crazy. Larry had an identical twin brother who died in that building 10 years previously. We had a chronic patient, always on the call button, hated being on fluid restrictions. You know the type. The nurses have to take turns during the shift answering the call button so the primary can actually do other work. And this was a frequent flyer cause he was very chronic, very borderline, and the hospital was the only place he wouldn't fluid overload. I worked from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. He died about 8 p.m. Oh, the look on his face like, how could you let me die? Like it was our fault. Anyway, family came and gone by 9 p.m. Funeral home gone at 9:30 p.m. About 10 p.m., the call button starts going off. I was there, call button going off every 5 minutes. One of the nurses was a very spiritual girl. At about 2 a.m., after like 4 hours of this, Nurse Mary snaps, "Enough." She walks down to the room and practically screams into the empty room, "Mr. X, you have died. You can't be in here bothering us anymore. Move along. In the name of Jesus, I'm exorcising you from this plane of existence. Go to the light and be happy." And I kid you not, the call button stopped going off then and there. I do interfacility transfers as an EMT, so get to see all the skilled facilities and hospitals in the state. 2 places give me the hair-raising, just bad negative juju creeps: an abandoned School of the Feeble-Minded and the state's prison mental health facility that used to be a huge tuberculosis ward when there were massive outbreaks back in the day. A third creepy place is the old birthing hospital that got turned into a long-term care facility. The top floor is mostly padlocked off. Jokingly, I asked a nurse on the elevator if the building was haunted, and she matter-of-factly said yes. Little kids' shapes on the top floor, and residents report older women in dresses. She said there were areas of the building she refused to go without another person. I was working a night shift job as an aide caring for a lady with terminal cancer on hospice at home, as I have for years. She was starting to slip, and I woke her family, 2 girls and DH. We were all sitting around. She was pretty quiet and peaceful. All of a sudden, she looked toward the door and said, Rex, you're here for me. I'm ready and they won't let me go." I saw a shadowy figure come into the room and felt the creepiest evil spirit. I'm not normally spooked, but I was so glad when it was time for me to go home. I turned to watch this spirit, and the family was looking at me like, "What are you looking at?" The lady died later that day. A few months later, her daughter had been sick, just not well, not terminal, and they called my agency to see if I would come and stay with him at night for a few days until he was a little stronger. I stayed 2 nights. All kinds of weird paranormal stuff in that house. Voices in rooms that were empty, sound of people moving around when everyone was asleep, etc. I decided I didn't care how sick he was or how much that family liked me. I was not doing another shift there. A couple of stories from the unit. In bed 3, there was a homeless PT, Willie, who, thanks to modern medicine, was kept alive for, I believe, around 3 months. No family to stop care. Willie eventually died, but PTs who are in bed 3 will talk about their friend Willie, who brought them a blanket or stopped by to talk. Bed 3 is at the end of the unit and has an anteroom before you go in. You can't see directly in bed 3 unless you're in the anteroom or looking at the room on the monitor. One night with no PT in bed 3, the monitor flips to the room and a body was seen laying over the side of the bed, over the side rails, kind of floating. The room was checked and no one was there. Another night, a nurse who has worked in the unit a few years saw someone sitting in a chair behind the door in bed 3 with their legs crossed. She wondered, since we have limited visiting hours, how a family member got in the room. She went in the room and no one was there. Needless to say, she was freaked out. There was also another PT who was a young woman in her 20s who contracted necrotizing fasciitis, flesh-eating disease, from one of her kids who had strep. She was in the unit a while and eventually died. One of the nurses coming on to the next shift wanted to know why the PT was standing on the backside of the unit with her twin daughters holding their hands, wondering how she made such a miraculous recovery. She was informed the PT had died earlier that day. The very small step-down unit I worked in was having nighttime staffing issues. I agreed to rotate to nights to help them out. It was a 4-bed, newly renovated unit. It was around 3 a.m., and I was watching the monitors, listening to the patients snore. The pencil drawer slid open. I didn't think much of it since the hospital was on a very busy avenue, and I thought it was caused by the vibrations from the traffic on the busy road below. After sliding the drawer back several times, I decided if the drawer felt it needed to be open, so be it. Several minutes later, I heard a noise in the room, the patient's bathroom door opening, and the sound of someone pushing an IV pole. Since I did not have clear view of the bathroom, I just thought one of the staff members from the main floor had dashed in to wash their hands. I looked up from my monitor viewing to see a patient we recently had in the unit. It was Mrs. G, an older woman who came in with a typical chest pain, became septic due to a gallbladder issue. She evidently had expired in the unit. Although the hospital itself had been on this site for years, the unit was newly renovated, right down to tearing down walls and putting up new ones. I heard the patient's bathroom door open, and again I heard the rattling of the IV pole and shuffling feet. I looked up and saw Mrs. G standing there in the middle of the floor, one hand pushing the IV pole, the other hand on top of the pump on the pole. She stopped walking, turned and waved, nodded her head, said everything was going to be okay, took a few steps, and disappeared. It was quite a sight to see. Shortly after that vision, one of the nurses from the floor came in to see if I needed anything. I told her no, I was okay, and asked her if she had ever seen a ghost in the hospital. She looked at me, gasped, and asked, "No, why?" And I explained to her what had just happened. She said she would never step foot in that room again. Mrs. G was the first patient to die in that unit. She was well liked by all the staff, and my feeling was that she was watching over us. The day shift came in, and I told them my story. They weren't surprised. Through the years working at various hospitals, worked as a nurse extern my senior year in nursing school, and heard older nurses telling their stories about ghosts, I thought they were just burnt out. Ha! Yes, there are ghosts in care facilities. If they are not seen, their presence is felt. They leave an energy behind,